Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We're excited to have our very own Pat Lakacher. Pat is one of our customer engagement specialists, and she will be presenting on best ERP housekeeping practices. And I know you're all eager to get started with this presentation. So before I pass it over to Pat, as a reminder, we are recording this webinar and we will post it to our on-demand webinar library for you to review again or share with anyone. And if you do have any questions during our presentation, please feel free to type them into the questions box and we will answer them at the end of our session during our Q&A time. So now I'm going to pass it on over to Pat to kick off our presentation.
Thanks, Angie. So good morning, or I guess good early afternoon, depending on where everybody is. I would like to welcome you to the Best ERP Housekeeping Practice webinar that I'll be presenting today. And my name is Pat Lakacher. I am a customer engagement specialist at Innovia. I have about 30 years of experience working with ERP packages, which sort of led me to coming up with this topic. What I have found in the many years is that most companies don't do anything in preparing or doing housekeeping, cleaning data in their ERP system. They pretty much wait until they're doing an upgrade, a re-implementation, or some type of a major project. So at that point, you need a lot of resources for those projects. And then on top of that, we're asking you to do all this additional heavy lifting to clean data. So what I thought I would do is go through some areas that you may want to consider working on throughout the year so you're in a better state when you are going to do an upgrade or re-implementation. So with that being said, we have a poll that we're going to send out just to see who may be working on, who maybe might be in process of doing an upgrade or a re-implementation, who may be considering that through 2021, or maybe sometime in 2022, or maybe that's not even on the table at this point. So the areas that I want to cover today are 4 key areas, and we're going to take a look at data cleansing. We're going to look at how companies could maintain their users. What are some ways that you could be tracking information relating to your license and ISVs? And then finally, we'll take a look at backup and restore management. So
Pat?
first, yes?
If I could just interject, we did get the poll tallied.
Oh, great. Great.
And I can share those results. 80% said no, they're not looking. And 20% said after 2021.
Okay, great. So this is what I would say. Of the 80% that are not going to do anything, there's a lot of things I'm going to share today that even if you're not looking to do an upgrade or a re-implementation, there's a lot of things that you can do just to get your data and do a better inventory of maybe some of the things that you have. And for the other 20%, these are clearly some things that you should be doing now. So thanks, Angie. So the last thing I mentioned is we're going to look at backup and restore management. I'm going to start off with data cleansing. And why is data cleansing so important? Well, data comes into the system and that becomes information. That information is then really turns into analytics, which is used for business decisions. So it really starts at the very beginning. If the data that's coming into your system is dirty data or it's invalid data, that really can affect decisions later on down the road. So in a nutshell, data cleansing is really identifying these records or bad fields and then replacing them because they're either incomplete, inaccurate, irrelevant, or there's just another issue with that particular type of data. I'd like to review what I call the 110-100 quality principle rule. And what this essentially is saying is that if you can trap and address data at the first entry point when it is bad and you address it, the cost of addressing that is much lower. So let's say we have a customer record and someone enters a duplicate customer record and we notice that right then. Okay, if we take care of it, we don't have necessarily any activity against the second record, and there's a low cost in taking care of it. If we let both of those records flow through and it's for the same customer, we now get on to another level where now we have activity against these particular customer records. And if we need to address it, it's a little more invasive. Now, we not only have to address the customer records, there could be customer price records, there could be customer sales orders that are there for the same customer, but we're not really even seeing that. We're going to probably have to run special reports to combine them. Okay, if we don't even do anything at that point, and we let this data follow through, and a duplicate customer is probably not going to get to the third level here, but let's say there was some data that came in externally and it was problematic. Okay, what could happen at the third level is we go to run a posting routine, and guess what? The posting routine doesn't work. Or we go to run a report and the report stops. Or we go to do a year-end closing and we can't do a close. Well, at this point, the cost to fix that is much greater because most likely you're going to have to get your partner involved. They're going to have to take a look at the data. We're going to have to come up with a plan to fix it. And then we're going to have to come up with what do we do to prevent this from happening moving forward. There's also business disruption, especially if you can't run something that you need to. So keep in mind that when you notice a data issue, it's best to address it at that point. There's different types of data issues that we're going to talk about. One is duplicate data. And I think many of you have probably seen where you go into a system and a contact is in there more than once, the same contact or a customer. Maybe we have it in there as the ABC company, and I didn't notice, and I put it in as the ABC company. Well, now we have duplicate records. We could also, and this happens a lot with vendors, customers, sometimes even items. We could have conflicting data. This is where we can have similar type records with different attributes. For example, I may be setting up some items and I decide that the base unit of measure is going to be each and I'm going to be selling in feet. Okay, maybe my counterpart comes in and they're setting up similar type records and they decide that the base is going to be feet and they're going to change they're going to actually reverse the unit of measure conversion. Okay, it's going to work, but it's very conflicting for someone that comes in and looks at these similar records and says, well, why are some records set up this way and some records are set up another way? Tribal knowledge comes into play. Somebody will say, oh, this is why so-and-so set these up, so-and-so set those up. But let's try to standardize our data so we don't have conflicts. Third, there's incomplete data. This happens a lot in companies where there's a series of people that are responsible for putting data in on a record. It can also happen in NAV and Business Central because when you enter, say, a customer, you can enter a customer and just enter the customer name and you can get out and guess what? I have a customer set up. But if someone in customer service needs to enter a sales order, they'll be able to pull up the customer, but they're not going to get very far if there's no posting group set up or there's invoicing or payment information that is missing. And then the last one we're going to address is invalid data. Now, for the most part, the data within the system is fine, but invalid data typically comes in from external resources, islands of data, Excel spreadsheets, other systems that you may be running that is importing some data into NAV or Business Central. And all of these things that may seem small actually can create lost time and profits. There's certainly added costs, manual costs, that when these issues come up, someone needs to go in and figure out, number one, why is this happening? Who did this? How are we supposed to fix it? So there's a lot of manual effort to straighten out these things, and there could even be missed opportunities. For instance, if you had multiple customers in there and you're not aggregating all the sales, you might have a missed opportunity of something that you could be promoting to them. So what I've put together here is what I would call some data cleansing tools and tips. The first area that we're going to look at is duplicate records, because I have found that when we're doing any type of data cleansing for customers that are doing an upgrade or re-implementation, they will often say, oh, we have customers in there more than once or vendors in there more than once. Well, the sad news is that in NAV, there is no easy way to fix that, okay? But it can be addressed. So if we have two customers that are truly two customer records for the same customer, first we need to identify that. Then we will pick which is going to be the master record or the one that we really want to use. So we will zero out the balance of the one that we're not using. And this is done through either transaction or journal entry. Then we're going to block that record. The whole purpose of blocking that record is it's going to prevent us from using that record further on down the road. So now we've isolated to this is the one record we're going to use. And then the final step is we need to take that balance and we need to move it to the record that we are going to be using. So now we've manually actually combined over into one record. The good news is, for anyone that's using Business Central or Dynamics 365, we have a Merge with Function tool. And that tool it's available for customers and vendors. So if you were on a customer record and you go to Other, Action, click on Function, you'll see a Merge With. And what that will allow you to do is you can pull up both of those customers and it will combine them into, you will select which one you want to combine into, but it will also take care of your subsidiary files. So you're not going to have any orphans. If we have the ABC company and that's going to be what we want, we're not going to have any records out there that are still for the ABC company. So that's a really great function. Now, as I said, it only works for customers and vendors. Unfortunately, I know many companies, they want to use this for items and for even GL accounts. I think that the reason that it's not available right now for items is that there's an awful lot of subsidiary files and transaction files that are used for items. The next area that we're going to look at is incomplete data. And the best way, I think, to address incomplete data is probably using some workflow and rules. This could be done through some of the Power App tools. There's some limited workflow within both NAV and Business Central, but clearly if you want to set up required fields that you know someone is always putting in and you're going to prevent them from getting out of that record, then you want to set up workflow and rules. So you could use a tool like Flow, or there are some other products out in the market that do work with these, that they specialize in just that. Within the standard product, there is a way that, say we're on the customer page, there is a way that you could actually promote, it's not promoting, but it's actually setting up the fields that you want the mouse to go to. So if there's like, or the cursor, if there's like 10 fields that I definitely want my user to go to before they get out, we can actually direct them to those 10 fields, but there's nothing mandatory that makes them put anything in that field. So if we want it to be mandatory and required, we either have to go with workflow, look at a tool on the outside, or we can use a customization. Invalid data. Well, the good news is that both NAV and Business Central handle validation extremely well. If we're in either of those boxes, I'm not concerned about bad data. I'm not concerned about invalid data. Where we get bad data is if there's a custom field set up and the internal validation isn't used. For example, let's say we have a customer record set up and I want to set up an additional salesperson field. So I set up an additional salesperson field, which is a custom field, and I don't validate against the salesperson table. So I pretty much let the user type in whatever data they want. Well, further on down the road, if I didn't set that up and validate against the salesperson table, there's no name there. If I go to run a report, I'm not going to really be able to pick up anything. So now we have a disconnect of data. The biggest area where I see invalid data is from islands of data that are outside of NAV and Business Central. I think most companies use Excel a lot and they'll import data in from Excel, or they have other legacy systems that they're bringing information in. And when this data comes in, it needs to be validated. If that data is brought in through a journal or brought into standard nav functionality, the validation will occur. However, if the data is brought in and goes directly into a SQL table and goes into a SQL field, the validation does not always occur. So that's probably the primary reason why all of a sudden we see like data coming in and we're like, how did this get in here? I do want to talk a little bit. One of the tools that is good for cleansing data is the configuration packages. And I don't know how many of you have used those before, but I'm currently working with a customer and they are implementing an e-commerce site. And one of the things they noticed is all their descriptions were in uppercase. And so instead of them going one by one, which you could call up a record one by one in Nav or Business Central and change them, what we did is we exported just the item number and the description out to Excel. We used the proper command, changed all the descriptions, and then we were able to use the configuration package to bring them all in. So that was a great way to do a global change. After we did that, they then noticed that when they were over in the e-commerce solution, they were not able to get the items that they wanted when they were searching by description. So they needed to standardize their descriptions. So once again, we exported the item and the descriptions out into Excel. They made the necessary changes for standardizing their descriptions so that they would show up right over in e-commerce. And then we were able to use the configuration package to bring it back into their database. So that's a really powerful tool. You could also use it, say you have customers and the salesperson is changing and you don't want to go in one by one and change them. What you could do is you could actually just export the customer and the salesperson code out and you could change them that way. So there's a lot of uses for doing global changes and for cleaning data. The next item is obsolete. So we often get the question of, well, we're not using this data, can we just get rid of it? Nav and Business Central do not allow you to delete any master records if there's activity against them. Okay, if there's any kind of history, then you need to keep the record there. If you entered a customer and right after you entered the customer, you realize that you didn't, it was a mistake, yes, you can delete that because there's no activity against it. So the way to manage any type of obsolete data is to utilize the block field, which is on many of the master files within Nav and Business Central. So when you block the record, it will prevent you from doing any transactions against it. You can also set your filters, say, for your item list or your customer list so that you can exclude the blocked items. So now we're just looking at anything that's active. The final area of like cleansing data and making sure we're keeping everything in sync is, say we have a test database and we have a production database. And in that example where I'm working with this customer who's cleansing all of their item descriptions, we're doing that in test because the test database is connected for user acceptance testing. It's connected to the e-commerce site right now. But at some point, we're going to want to take those descriptions and we're going to want to move them into production. So what we'll do is we'll do a configuration package. We'll export the item and the description out of test, and then we can just bring in those two pieces of information over into the production system. We don't have to bring in all the unit of measure. We don't have to bring in all the 100 plus fields that are typically on the item card. We're just going to bring in what we need to. So hopefully, there's something here that there's a little takeaway for you as to, something that you could utilize in your current system and do some data cleansing. So the next topic is licensing, and I'm sort of a big fan of knowing what you have. And this is sort of an inventory of getting organized, knowing what type of license you have and where the license is. So Innovia does a great job of tracking this information in our CRM system by customer. So we have this. But oftentimes a customer, especially a customer that we have not been working with, a new customer comes to us, and they have no idea what this information is. So I think it's just great for customers to have this stored someplace in their system. First off, the location of where your license is, which is typically on your Nav server. The next thing is, what is the model that you're using? That's pretty obvious because if you're on subscription, you're getting a monthly bill. If you're on perpetual, you're getting an annual enhancement invoice. But there are times that I've talked to companies and they were not sure. Then what version are you running? Is it Business Central or is it NAV? And then what about the license level? So on NAV, we have 2013, 15, 18. We have different releases. So there's like R2. There's also bills that go with it. And all of that is really important when we're taking on, especially a new customer, because depending on the bill or the version that you're on, things work differently. And the same for Business Central. Are you on version 14 or 17? 14 is sort of a critical version in that with development, prior to 14, you could still be doing some object development. After that, all development had to be done in extensions. And likewise, the user experience, once you go past 14, is in browser mode only. So those are just some considerations. Microsoft also has sort of divided the solution functionality by license. So depending on whether you're on an on-prem or in cloud or an older version of NAV or Business Central, you could either be on Essential or Premium or Starter and Extended. Essential and Starter is really the model that will include all of your financial and operational modules and functionality. Companies have to move to Premium and Extended, typically only if they're a manufacturer or they're going to do service management. And I believe there's also some warehouse functionality that is just geared in those two. So it's good to know what you have. And then finally, the user type. We have full users and limited users. A full user basically has reign of anything in the system, and it's just prohibited by the permission sets that are set up for them or the role center. The limited user is typically someone that's going to maybe analyze data or run reports or just read data. A limited user is great for anyone that's an executive who is not running any kind of transactions. It's just going in. Maybe they're just viewing dashboards. A limited user can also be used, though, for someone that has a very limited transaction. For example, if I was only using NAV or Business Central to enter my time entry, okay, very specific function, I could be a limited user. But it is really confined by the number of tables that you can access for writing to. Okay, now objects, I'm only really bringing this up for people that have older NAV versions because in the older versions, whenever you had a customization, you would have to order a type of object, whether it's a table, a form, a page, or a report. And they basically came in bundles of 10 or 100. So why is it important to even keep an inventory of this? Well, if you need to do a customization, and we can go into your database and we can also look this up for you, but sometimes it's good for companies just to have this information at their hands. If you requested that we do a report and maybe you purchased 100 reports in a report pack, but you've used 99 and you want us to write 3 reports. Well, we're going to have to order 2 more report objects, or we can repurpose possibly one of the report objects that you have. Now, how do we know whether we can repurpose one? Most companies don't always know which reports they're running. And even if a new report was written, sometimes it was written for someone that is no longer at the company. So there is a utility that we can actually put on your system that can actually help track the reports so we know which reports are actually being run. And this utility is really important for anyone that's going to do an upgrade or re-implementation. I've seen companies that had 250 custom reports. Okay, that's a lot of reports for us to port over if you're only using 60. So this tool will help isolate what are the reports that you're using. And I suggest that you probably run this tool for at least 3 months, because some reports are weekly, some are monthly, and maybe some are just run on a quarterly basis. But it is a really good tool to help us when we sit down with a company to figure out, okay, of these custom reports, which are the ones that we need to bring over? Okay, once again, here's a know what you have slide, and this relates to the ISV products that you may be running in your business. So ISV, independent software vendor, I know that we use a ton of acronyms in our industry, and sometimes we just expect everybody knows what they mean. So anyways, when you look at the ISV products that you have, it's important for you to at least know who is the vendor that is supplying this. You may have gotten it through Innovia, but who is the vendor that initially wrote the product? Are you getting the support through us, through Innovia, or are you getting it directly from the vendor? That's important because if you have a problem, you certainly want to know where's your first stop for getting support. And then the billing. Is the billing coming from Innovia? Does the billing come directly from that particular vendor? And finally, if it is a perpetual where you actually own this ISV, it's important for you to know what the expiration dates are on that particular product. It's not going to stop working, but what will happen is if you let that expiration date lapse, then you're not entitled to get like the next available version. Okay, and then we can get that set up for you, but it just takes a little time. And there's typically like a penalty for any kind of lapse time. So user management. Okay, this is important because I find that a lot of companies today, especially, they're managing users in Windows, users in SQL, Nav and Business Central, and a host of other areas that I'm not going to go into. But when we're dealing with user management and we're working with customers, it's really important for them to at least know like who is managing these different areas. Sometimes it's one person in a company is responsible for all of this. Sometimes it's a couple people in the company that are managing, the setup of all of this. Other times it's an external IT provider who might be doing part of this or all of this. But it's really important to know who's responsible for these particular areas because when something needs to get set up, it just helps the process move much smoother. Another area that is really important is knowing who has global admin rights at your company. And why is this important? Well, there's certain software by Microsoft that does require that you have global admin rights to install. Or if we're working with you in setting up Innovia to be your CSP provider, in order to go through the process, we need someone who has global admin rights. I've worked with many companies that, number one, they don't know what global admin rights is. They have no idea whether it's someone internally in their company or someone that is external. And so we go through a series of emails, we'll check this, do this. Okay, well, that's fine if it's nothing critical, but what about if it's something that we need to install and it's something that needs to be done? Okay, this is a piece of information that is really important for every company to know. And every company should know who has global admin rights because it gives within their company, because it gives certain privileges that they can do certain things that other people cannot. Compliancy needs. This I put on because there's a lot of companies that are in spaces where if they set up users within their system due to compliancy needs and audit, even though the user is no longer there, they can't just get rid of them. They may need to like deactivate or change the status of them. So that's important to know what compliancy needs, what audits that your company may be encountering, what information needs to reside when and for how long. You do want to know that when it relates to users. If you have no compliancy needs like that, then you certainly should have some type of a policy to know when you should take people out of the database. I've gone into someone's database once and we were looking at something and they said, I don't know why these 5 people are here. They're not even with the company. Well, if they have no compliancy needs, there really is no reason to have to leave those users in the system. My recommendation is that you just leave the users that are active in the system unless there's some kind of compliancy requirements. I made a slide on database management because I think that as part of your housekeeping or just keeping things organized, our recommendation is that each company have 3 databases. Obviously, you have your production one where you're doing your go live work. Then we recommend that you have a testing database. This is really where we're rolling things in and you're doing testing. You're doing the user acceptance testing before we move it into production. And then we suggest that you have a development database. I often get the question as to, okay, well, I know why I have production, but why do I have to have development and testing separate? Well, one reason would be we could be working on 3 different things in development for you. And one could be maybe a long-term project, and maybe there's a quick report that you just want us to do. So what we can do is, instead of pulling certain things out of development and going right to production, we will take what has been completed in development, move it into testing. We're not affecting the other developers that are working on the other items. That item gets rolled into testing. You do your user acceptance testing, and now we roll that into production. So it's just a really good cycle of knowing where we are. But with that being said, you really want to have an inventory of your databases. What are the databases that we have? Where are they being stored? Very importantly is, how are they being identified? I see icons on people's desktops, and it often will say like Nav Sandbox or Business Central Sandbox or Production or Dev. You certainly want to make sure that the icons are labeled correctly. And even some people will actually change the company names within the database. So it'll have something that says test or dev, so that when someone gets in there, they know exactly which one they're entering. The last thing you want is for someone to jump into production thinking it's the test environment and they start doing some work. The final item I wanted to just bring up about when you do have these 3 databases, it's a good practice, once again, another housekeeping item, of just refreshing the data in your test and development databases. So you might have set those up like a year ago, and you're using the test data that's in there, and that's fine. But at some point, refreshing the data from your production system and getting it into test and development is key, especially because maybe some setups changed. Okay, we certainly need to know that over in the test and development side if we're doing any kind of testing or development for you. The last thing I wanted to talk about was backups and how key they are to your environment. And it's really important for companies to know, well, what is the frequency of the backups? I'll ask somebody, well, what's the frequency of your backup? Oh, we do a nightly backup. And I'll say to them, well, is it a nightly system backup? Is it just a nightly, is it a nightly backup of just Nav or Business Central, a SQL backup? What type of backups are you doing and how frequently? Some customers, depending on their needs, they may be doing backups, intermittent backups throughout the day, which can be set up. Where is this backup being stored? Okay, is it in the cloud? Is it local? Is it offsite? You really want to know that. And then what is the type of backup that you're running? Is it a full backup? Or which means that if we do have to do a backup, there's probably one file that we're going to pull from. Or is it a differential backup where it's only maintaining the changes from the last backup that it did? With a differential backup, it usually requires multiple files get pulled in to do a restore. And then you want to make sure you're maintaining your SQL log files. SQL log files grow, and they continue to grow unless they're maintained. I did run into a situation once where a company was not maintaining their SQL log files, ran out of space, and guess what? The system stopped until we were able to expand the files and then maintain them. So that is really important. And backups are great, and we want to have them handy, but you need to have a restore procedure and you need to test it. So having the backups and ensuring that there are no errors is the number one thing. But you should have some type of a cycle where you're pulling a backup and you're just doing a restore, or at least making sure that it recognizes the file. Because the last thing that you want to happen is for you to be in a state where you need to do a backup. You need to pull a backup, we get the backup, we go to do a restore, and we get an error. So these are just it's an overview of some things to think about that could probably help your business. So, there's certainly some areas that you can do yourself, but you could also ask us about an environment review where maybe we could make some data cleansing recommendations, run some reports with you, take a look at your data. We could probably provide some licensing. We could provide the licensing and ISV information if you don't have it, because we do have that. We could audit the users and see if there are any users that you could be taking out. Take a look at your licensing with you. And certainly assist if you don't have all of your databases set up or you're unsure whether you do, we can help you take a look at that. Or we could set up the additional test and dev databases. We could assist in refreshing the data within any of these non-production databases. An item that I put on here that I didn't really talk about on the last slide was also setting up a test company within your production database. So I'm a big fan of setting up a test company because if you want to, when you're in that one production database, all the functionality is the same within all those companies except for setup. So if I wanted to test, how would something work if I set it up slightly different? I could go right into my test company. I'm not affecting any data in any of the other companies, and I can actually do my test right there. And then finally, a key area, which I'd mentioned before, is review your backups. Know when the backups are being done. What is the frequency? Where are they? What is your restore procedure? When was the last time that you actually tested your restore and you feel comfortable that, hey, if we run into a problem, we're good. We know that that'll work. So I will leave you with this. I always say 1 hour of planning and preparation, which I sort of look at housekeeping and cleaning as, is going to save you 5 hours on the other end. And I often say, easy now, hard later, or hard now, put the effort in now and clean up a lot of this stuff. It's going to be a lot easier when you do go to an upgrade or a re-implementation. So with that being said, I'm going to open it up and see if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Pat. We do have a statement, actually.
Okay.
Great stuff. Gave a lot of ideas of what to discuss with customers. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, I like statements. So if there's no questions, my whole point was to give some takeaways so people to be starting to think about, what you could do in your own company or even some ways that our Innovia team could help you with.
All right, well, if nobody has any questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you, Pat, for presenting, and to everyone who is joining us, or if you're watching on demand, thank you for taking the time to watch this. I do want to let you know we do have some training workshops for you and your team members to attend. You can visit our training workshop page at innovia.com/workshops for more information and to register for the training workshop that fits your role. And we do have a webinar coming up next Tuesday afternoon with VersaPay. Come take a snack break with VersaPay, and they'll be presenting on lower payment processing costs by up to 40%. So check out our website for more of our upcoming events, and that's innovia.com/events. And we do have a podcast going on. If you haven't heard of it already, it's called the Innovia Conversation. And we want to encourage you to listen to our selection that our hosts, Steve Waltz and Jeff Progolski, have provided to us. And you can find out all about the different podcast platforms to listen to on our podcast page, and that's innovia.com/podcast. So check out the selection and subscribe so you'll get notified when those new episodes air. All right, Pat. Well, still no questions have come through, so I think we're good on that. If anybody has any questions thereafter, you're more than welcome to reach out to Pat or your account manager here at Innovia Consulting, and we can get those addressed for you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Angie.
Thank you. And thank you everyone again for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you soon on another Innovia webinar. Take care, everyone.
Yes, have a great day.